The fastest way from point A to point B is a straight line. Simple enough when there are few to little obstacles between the points. In most video games, however, going from one place to another involves some sort of struggle in between. Enemies, obstructions, geography, or there might be some altogether positive distraction, such as an alluring treasure, save spot, or some visually appealing vista. Such elements make the journey interesting, so when one reaches the destination, there's a feeling of accomplishment, of overcoming the odds, compounded with some achievement granted in the form of a reward, be it lore, in-game items, or some other form of progress. In the modern open-world genre, the points between A and B are often farther apart. Given the structural nature of the world design, modern games often have relatively big worlds that can sometimes take 30 minutes to an hour to traverse uninterrupted. And we're not even going to mention the procedural generation of Elder Scrolls Daggerfall or No Man's Sky insane universe design here. Given the relatively large distances needed to be traversed in open world games, the fundamental design question is this: how do we make traversal interesting and engaging? A repeated criticism of open world games is that they are boring. Specifically, the spaces between plot points, mission objectives, and fetch quests, while initially visually interesting, lack gameplay substance. This in turn ends up drowning gameplay content in a sea of distance. The joy of being a skilled soldier taking on enemies or a brave archer dismantling large machines is suffocated by the miles one must travel in order to reach these engaging sections. More often than not, the distances needing to be traveled are further hindered by the overwhelming passive nature of movement. The frequent modus operandi of moving one's virtual character is pushing the direction stick in the intended direction, with the occasional jump, climb, or descent being the exceptions that prove the rule. Death Stranding takes an interesting approach to this issue, synthesizing approaches seen in other video games, and forces players to deeply engage with the world's geographic and topographic makeup, shifting player mindsets from perceiving the virtual world not simply as the proverbial curtains which frame the virtual stage, but as an object and defining element of the game itself. First, we must talk about the open world genre and the sandbox genre. Now, this debate as to the definition of what an open world game is, in contrast to what a sandbox game is, plagues internet forums, and was especially prevalent in the late 2000s and early 2010s, around the time of Minecraft's release to the public. Some have argued that these terms are synonymous, that there is fundamentally no difference between the two terms. Open world games have a linear story and objective, but the setting allows players to work through most missions and objectives in their own way. In this sense, all open world games are sandbox games, and vice versa, because freedom is allotted to players to interact with the world in their own fashion. Others argue the complete opposite. These are two fundamentally different genres. Sandbox games are akin to children playing in a sandbox. You manipulate the play area through constructive and/or destructive means with no set goals. You create your own fun and are not bound by anything, other than the physics and mechanics of the given world. In short, while all sandbox games technically have an open world in its environmental design, they share different gameplay structures, and thus, not all open world games are sandboxes. I would argue that I fit more in the latter camp, although with a major caveat. Instead of seeing these two concepts as hard binaries, there is a conceptual gradation wherein many self-declared open world games fall somewhere between the two, albeit leaning more heavily in the open world genre with a linear story and given objectives, lightly borrowing elements from sandbox games. Death Stranding is an open world game with light, and I stress light, sandbox elements. In Death Stranding, you play as Sam Porter Bridges, a post-apocalyptic delivery person traversing the vast, beautiful, and treacherous lands of a reimagined United States of America. The story of the game is given to you in chapters, indicating that there is a linear progression of knowledge and understanding offered to the players as they make particular deliveries at critical junctures in the story's timeline. There are imaginably dozens and dozens of ways for players to make it from any given point A to point B, with points A and B changing depending on one's mission. Along the way, there are certain things to keep track of: the condition and weight of one's cargo, Sam's stamina and balance, the stress of BB, topographic and geographic conditions, and the presence of enemies. However, a major saving grace of this load of stress is that players can use several tools or build several pre-made structures to traverse the landscape, blazing their own trail as they conquer steep cliffs, rivers, and even snowy mountains to make the journey a bit easier, not only for themselves, but also for others. Structures that any given player puts down or builds has a chance to show up in other players' worlds, opening up paths that one may not have originally imagined to be a viable option. This type of asymmetric co-op is something of a strange mix between the messages one finds in Dark Souls and the structures others build in one's Minecraft world. Although you would never actually interact with the person who built the structure, you can give them likes and benefit from their work to make the journey easier. In this sense of constructively affecting one's own world and potentially the worlds of others, Death Stranding definitely borrows, albeit in an unorthodox fashion, the construction element found in sandbox games. This elementary discussion between the open world genre and the sandbox genre and their subsequent elements is not meant as an aside to the larger point at hand, that Death Stranding is bringing something different to the table of open world games. Although this list is nowhere near exhaustive as it could be, we'll be looking at some popular open world games for both the positive and negative aspects of the modern open world genre and how Death Stranding fits into the mix. We'll be looking at elements from Metal Gear Solid 5, Horizon Zero Dawn, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Minecraft, Spider-Man, and Breath of the Wild. Assassin's Creed Odyssey offers a beautiful and exploratory depiction of what ancient Greece was like in an open-world fashion. After the opening part of the game, the player is technically free to explore many of the beautiful islands and vistas of this historically and culturally rich land. I say technically because most areas initially have enemies that are higher than the player's level, so that while one could explore the entire world, the frustration of running into and losing to dangerous enemies can impede the desire to explore. However, when the player gets to a competent level, one can run through the streets and rooftops of Athens, ride a ship to the Aegean Sea, and even end up exploring Atlantis? Unfortunately, despite Odyssey's rich aesthetics, traversing feels like a chore and often turns into a mindless task. The reason for this is the hold X and go method of getting to your destination. You literally just point in the direction you want to go, hold X or whatever button you have assigned for traversal, and your main character traverses the world for you. While the climbing looks cool in and of itself, those familiar with the Assassin's Creed franchise will not be surprised at the movements here. Even after 10 or so hours of gameplay, you will have seen most of your main character's abilities to parkour through forests, caves, and towns. Movement becomes monotonous. Traversal becomes trivial. This problem becomes even more compounded when you are given a quest and the destination is at another town, on another island, or just halfway across the map. Even climbing to certain vistas, which turn into fast travel points, lacks several degrees of excitement. While the camera work is epic and the landscapes are beautiful, there's ultimately little to no challenge to get to these points, making such achievements feel more like participation trophies rather than accomplishments. About halfway through the game, when a decent amount of the map has been explored, one quickly finds out that much of the architecture and interior design is repetitive, with only a few notable moments of environmental storytelling occurring during the main campaign. To reiterate, the graphics are top-notch, but beauty is only skin-deep and there is a lot of proverbial skin to explore on this relatively big map. While the world is awe-inspiringly huge at first glance, the exploration mechanics, or lack thereof, make exploring itself a trite and tiresome ordeal. The Metal Gear series is one of my favorite franchises of all time, although I agree with many that MGS5 felt incomplete in many ways. However, my biggest gripe was not with the story but with the structure of the open level designs. The settings of Metal Gear Solid 5 do not lend themselves to being typically beautiful, but the variety of enemy camp designs and their contextual settings do make each particular site relatively unique, each with their own miscellaneous options of how to approach and conquer their given situation. Randomized weather can also be taken into account when devising one's plan of attack. We'll talk about the importance of these aspects later. What is important to focus on here is the space between these encounters. In between enemy camps are long stretches of plains, roads, or jungle trails, with sparse wildlife thrown into the mix. Going from here to there to do missions with very little to see or do makes it feel like the world was made to be big just for the sake of being big. In light of the story and political situations that comprise it, there are ample reasons as to why these areas are barren. However, the game sorely lacks interesting environments which diversify getting from point A to point B, consequently making the means of travel, by foot or by vehicle, unvaried and uninspiring. Traveling from landing zones to mission areas back to landing zones, every mission becomes a repetitive trek, an unfortunate aspect not found in the more linear Metal Gear games previous to 5. Now, Horizon Zero Dawn is a game that does many things right. Combat, story, a compelling main character, and a beautiful setting and world with some dark secrets. yet it also suffers from some of the same issues we have talked about so far. Big open spaces with lots to see, but often little to do. Now, I do want to grant a little bit of defense to the world design here. The enemies here justify having big open spaces to fight, as one does need some generous room to appreciate the scale of the battles in this game. In fact, environmental cover is quite crucial for some of these battles, and the designers of this world definitely delivered in this area. The environments themselves are also diverse in terms of biomes and verticality. One is not quickly bored of the sights found in the first half of this game. Yet, outside of villages and cities, one eventually realizes that they are in an empty world composed of enemies, items, and the occasional NPC. While the generous amount of fast travel options are nice, they are indicative of an underlying design problem that a decent number of players would quickly find going through the vast and empty parts of the world more tedious than not. Both Metal Gear Solid 5 and Horizon Zero Dawn both lack a traversal system that makes it interesting and rewarding to explore the world for the sake of exploring. However, the parkour mechanics like those found in the Assassin's Creed games nullify feelings of accomplishment by almost automating the process of travel through its simplified hold X and go control scheme. Video game environments should not feel like glorified paintings, wherein one is awed by its beauty but unable to actually participate in their topographic structures. On the other hand, characters that glide through levels with little structural impediment dissociates effort from scale. When all it takes to cross a dangerous area is to hold down the automatic jump and climb button, then epic mountains are made into annoying molehills, and beautiful city sections are made into forgettable villages. Now these criticisms, to varying degrees, can also be directed at some other beloved games such as The Witcher 3, Red Dead Redemption, and Skyrim. I want to reiterate that I really like these games and definitely think they deserve their place as landmark titles. However, we should not suffocate our criticisms by breathing out praises. Criticism and praise can coexist despite what many reactionaries might think. What landmark titles help us do is collectively enjoy a game and then pinpoint what aspects drove our enjoyment and what sections made us want to fast forward. Of course, the subjective stance of any given person, which stems from what video games they enjoyed growing up, their expectations going into any given video game, desires for certain storylines and themes, familiarity with a particular genre, etc., all affect how one experiences a game. Instead, the act of listening to another's standpoint may open our horizons to seeing things we could not before, or to hear our own intuitions that had not yet reached the level of articulation, perhaps leading us and others to chime in with our own experience of a given game and coming to an understanding of what thrills and what kills our virtual experiences. Despite the shortcomings of traversing environments in open-world games, there are plenty of positive aspects when it comes to the inherent innovation of engagement variability. In short, when games are not restricting in how one accomplishes the objective or missions, there is a freedom granted to players not seen in many other genres. For example, if I wanted to take out this entire base in Metal Gear Solid 5, whether to accomplish the mission or just for fun, there are several options before me. The first is point of entry. I have two major roads that lead into the area, and within these two roads are slightly deviant paths that open up different opportunities to get into the actual base. Second, I can go on the mission with or without a partner. Here, I choose Quiet because, well, she's the best. She can cover for me when I get into danger or actively start taking out targets. From here, I have to watch enemy pathing, which leads to option number 3, figuring out a route. Fourth, I can choose whether to be sneaky or aggressive. Implicit within this choice is figuring out which weapons I want to use, subduing enemies with my silenced tranquilizer, or going full Rambo with Quiet on a sniping rampage. After accomplishing whatever I wanted to accomplish, I can leave the area on foot or by stealing an enemy vehicle, taking out some enemies by running them over for good measure. In Horizon Zero Dawn, there are a multitude of ways to take out enemies. Similar elements to MGS5 are here as well. One can use stealth or run in fighting, pick out routes, but unlike MGS5, where non-violent runs are totally possible, aggression is part of the very heart of HZD. However, that doesn't mean that fighting is monotonous. The variety of arrows and weapons, environmental cover and topography, even overriding enemy machines to be temporary allies, all of these can make every enemy encounter a unique affair. For a quick example, it's possible to take out these three enemy chargers in different ways. I can override one, destroy the critical components for another, which instantly destroys it, and then I can stun the other one, giving me an option for a critical blow. With every developing situation, I have options before me which consistently ensures a refreshing combat experience. Making movement fun is a difficult challenge, as many people do not enjoy walking or running for exercise in real life, so those who want to make it interesting in video games are already climbing up a steep hill, so to speak. Yet, there are plenty of ways to make the journey itself an important aspect of gameplay, keeping the interest of players not only at points A and B, but also between them. Perhaps one of the most positive leaps forward in the open world genre in this regard has to come from Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which introduced a completely explorable open world with climbing mechanics, a stamina system, weather shifts that actually affected gameplay, and modes of travel which made the environment truly come alive. While these individual elements aren't particularly unique to Breath of the Wild, the holistic integration of all these concepts into a video game placed it head and shoulders above others. While the main point of this video is that Death Stranding has breathed new life into the open world genre, Breath of the Wild was already providing the oxygen, as it had anticipated many moves of Death Stranding, and I'm certainly not the first to note these similarities. What Breath of the Wild does well is making its world actually matter when it comes to gameplay. The world can be an obstacle to your goal, or a tool that can help you overcome the odds, with its varied biomes providing new ways of thinking of how to deal with a given situation. One of the most pure sandbox games, the legendary Minecraft, has influenced many games in and outside of its genre. Due to its, at the time, groundbreaking mechanic of building things wherever you want and exploring the depths of the world for resources, players were incentivized to explore, with new areas opening up more opportunities to build a base for reasons of aesthetics, efficiency, or both. Scouting out new locations, making mental notes of where to find resources, searching for new biomes, or even a place for a new home or epic base, all of these are rewarding aspects challenging players to run into the randomly generated world of the unknown. While its simplified movement mechanics match the blocking nature of the game, fall damage, sneaky enemies, and survival mechanics place pressure on one to think about the risk versus reward of exploration, with the in-the-moment shifting conditions making the journey back home speculative and exciting. Throughout the entire campaign of Marvel's Spider-Man, I never once got sick of going from point A to point B, despite the map being a condensed version of New York. Traveling is always fun, engaging, and surprisingly intuitive. Even after 1 year of not playing, it only took a few moments to satisfyingly swing across Spidey's stomping grounds. One could technically hold the web-slinging button and auto-traverse the city, similar to the auto-parkour system in Assassin's Creed. However, to do so is to not take advantage of the full power of Peter Parker. You can do tricks, pick up speed by diving, take quick turns, run on the sides of buildings, and perhaps the most satisfying move to quickly time, launch yourself off points, letting Spider-Man temporarily pick up a great deal of momentum. While some would say that traveling as Spider-Man is inherently fun because you are the web-slinger, it would have been easy to simply just let Spider-Man swing across the city without as much flash and frill put into this game. It's not a particularly deep traversal system, and that is more than alright, because one doesn't want to struggle as Spider-Man swinging across the city. What this particular traversal system does accomplish is making New York feel interactable in only a way that Spider-Man and other spider heroes can, lifting the environmental graphics from a nice backdrop to physical set. With both the achievements and faults of these games setting up the expectations for the open world genre, we can now step into the world of Death Stranding. At first glance, Death Stranding would seem to struggle to keep players engaged with its environments mostly void of NPCs. Most of the interactions between Sam and others is via holograms. When you're out in the world going from point A to point B, the physical characters you'll run into are mostly enemies and the occasional NPC porter. From a design standpoint, the environments are also relatively minimalistic in landscape. Some areas look like a bomb just dropped in the area, leaving little notable landmarks or details to hold visual attention. There are amazing vistas, but these are placed within the context of a desolate and lonely world. There are strong lore reasons for why the world is the way it is, so the question is how to make this particular world, especially traveling it, interesting. Death Stranding does this by making every step noteworthy. As a transporter, or porter for short, Sam must ensure that his cargo gets to its destination safely.
The more cargo Sam takes on, the more it throws off his balance. Each step in the world is given a topographic value of how unbalanced Sam will become when he steps into that place. Steep hills, mountains, snow, rivers, falling rocks, crevices, and rock faces all force Sam to think and rethink both his pathing and his priorities. Before, during, and after every mission, you can choose what equipment to bring that you think will help, but more equipment means more weight, more chance of becoming unbalanced, which means that you'll have to balance between taking care of your main cargo and bringing more equipment. The rain in this game, known here as timefall, also threatens the condition of your cargo, vehicles, and tools, causing them to become damaged over time. There is also a stamina meter that we'll always keep an eye on, along with BB's stress level. With all of this weighing on one's mind, not to mention the constant surprises of enemies and environmental shifts, means that the quote-unquote dull moments of traversal are welcomed moments of respite. Death Stranding blends elements found in Breath of the Wild, a sheer open design, stamina meter, and tools that allow for ingenuity, with Minecraft's weighted decision of risk versus reward in furthering one's exploration or turning back to get more equipment or repair one's cargo. On the surface, many of Death Stranding's missions boil down to being fetch quests, bringing one item in one location to another location. This type of quest is the bane of many games simply because the dominant trend in video game fetch quest history is riddled with formulaic enemy appearances and simply sucking up a player's time by forcing one to go through areas already explored. Yet the brilliance of Death Stranding, given its open world design and traversal system, is that the player must be engaged in every small detail of the journey. One mission example involves retrieving several pieces of equipment from an enemy-infested area. Technically, to complete the mission we only need one, but our goal here will be to grab a few. We don't want to be underachievers now, do we? After loading up some various pieces of equipment, we'll grab a bike from another player and shower them with likes. Now, there are multiple entrances to this area. One could set up a ladder and go straight ahead, inevitably into enemy territory. We could go around and try to stay out of the enemy's pathing, or we can try going the other way into a cramped corridor. There is also timefall in the area, which means that our cargo and equipment will be getting damaged the entire time we're here. If we want to avoid fighting, some carefully placed ladders will help us reach new routes to move around. Or we can choose to be aggressive and take on as many BTs as possible using some grenades or special guns. After picking up some cargo, we can head back and, well, got a little too confident there, huh? What is important to note here is that the traversal system is not adjacent to the gameplay when fighting enemies, but part of the very core of the gameplay itself. Getting hit by an enemy causes one to lose their balance, and, if hit particularly hard, even dropping cargo. There isn't a section between fighting and traversing, they are linked to one another. One always has to watch their environment and footing when engaging enemies. In these instances, it really does feel like the world is against you, but this constant danger, from either enemies or the world itself, keeps the player's attention by making every move inherently risky and exciting. When playing on a Minecraft server, you benefit from the paths and structures created by the community on the server. Although one does not directly interact with other players, the ability to build structures not only affects your world, but others as well. You can create links with other players so that their structures appear more in your world. This type of asymmetric cooperation opens up another level of motivation for exploration. Perhaps out of the goodwill of your own heart, your desire to see everything, and or envisioning efficient paths for later use, you build structures that can benefit others. However, when you first enter an area or a section of a level, it usually isn't automatically full of player-created structures, forcing you to traverse it with your own equipment and very little help. However, once areas are opened up to what's known as a chiral network, in other words, an area becomes online for you, this dynamically changes how the area or even larger level is experienced, as a section becomes populated with some equipment placed by other players. You can not only enjoy the benefits of these structures, but you can also add on to them, reinforce them, or use them to come up with alternative routes. In this way, the same area Sam has traversed before is no longer the same area, instead reimagined and conquered by a community of players. This circumscribed, but still relatively flexible system of building structures borrows lightly from Minecraft, sans the terraforming found in such sandbox games. Nevertheless, spaces aren't simply a given in Death Stranding, they are meant to be re-experienced in new and exciting ways. Up until this point, I've been mostly describing the mechanics of Death Stranding, but I want to shift to their importance in the current generation of open world games. Beyond aesthetic enjoyment, traversal in open world games has been dominantly a boring affair. And with some game companies trying to make bigger and bigger worlds, this has unfortunately led to graphically bloated but substantially superficial worlds. There are only so many times you can be awed by the views in any given place, so making traveling boring by making it passive hinders player engagement. The monotony of travel in so many games makes it easy to tune out, breaking my investment into seeing what's around the corner and what's next for this character. Death Stranding takes nearly the opposite approach. Again, the world is mostly stripped of any glitz, although a few sights are worth seeing. This is not to say it's not a graphically beautiful game. It is, but the importance of the game is in the traversal itself, which forces a positive investment into getting from here to there. The main challenge Death Stranding implicitly imposes on other open world games with similar characteristics is the idea of making the environment actually fun to explore. Not the treasures of the environment, not the rewards from getting to one's destination, not the secrets in caves nor behind waterfalls, but making the traversal in and of itself fun and engaging. What is sorely missing are open worlds that are actual worlds and not slightly functional backdrops. With game developers trying to impress with how large and beautiful they can create environments, it's sad to see so many of them being nothing more than glorified paintings that we mindlessly trek across. Sam reacts and interacts with the world around him in a way that makes you really believe that this tiny rock can really make you trip. This is not to say that Death Stranding is the perfect game. As others have said, it's not for everyone. There's a significant difference in pace between a game like Death Stranding and other open world games, with Death Stranding being a bit slower and even-keeled with occasional moments of combat. My playthrough is perhaps 80% traversal with 20% combat, with some of that combat being avoidable if I wanted to be sneakier rather than aggressive. This will no doubt turn some people off, as some expect their video games to be more directly action-oriented rather than a bit more methodical and relaxed. And these differences in desires are simply preferences in taste, neither good nor bad, just personal expectations of what one wants from their virtual experience. That doesn't mean that Death Stranding has nothing to say to faster-paced open-world action games. In fact, seeing a traversal system akin to Death Stranding in any third-person action game would definitely make for an interesting time, bringing up the monotony between concentrated fighting sequences and dull travel. If we could transpose an old saying which describes someone who lacks substance, we could say that some, perhaps even many, open-world games are a mile wide but an inch deep. My fundamental hope is that future open-world games are challenged to make their traversal more participatory, with worlds that aren't just a visual spectacle, but instead immersive environments which require engaged gameplay, so that rather than feeling like one has slogged through a level just to get from objective to objective, from point A to point B, players are invested in each maneuver in their journey, culminating in a sense of accomplishment with every goal reached. A world is a place of being, where people interact and struggle to survive. To create a place that lacks such substance is to walk into a world of deathly boredom. Death Stranding breathes life into the open world genre by making every step of the journey worth your attention.